2019 marked the 40th anniversary of a franchise that revolutionized anime and almost single-handedly changed the giant robot genre. I'm talking about Mobile Suit Gundam, a franchise that has spawned countless spin-offs and also has a main storyline that even to this day is moving forward. But in 2020 the pandemic struck the world and every plan had to be stopped to a certain degree. In 2020 we were supposed to see a moving RX-78 and that did happen, just for a few moments. But it was a huge deal worldwide, even getting the attention of international newscasters that confused the Gundam with a Transformer. But it's okay, even though we love the Granddaddy Gundam and know almost about all of its iterations on alternate continuities, franchise is not that well known around the world. Maybe people might have heard the name, or can even identify the most known traits of the robot, those being the red chin, the beefing, and the mouth bends. The problem then starts with the question, where do I begin to watch the series? Because as far as I'm concerned, seeing a huge robot in front of you, the OG RX-78, the Unicorn, or even the new RX-78 in Yokohama definitely grabs your attention and curiosity to see where did it originated from. But with 40 years of stories, it can be kind of hard to get into the franchise. And even though the animation, character designs, and female character portrayals have not aged that well, and probably is not the best way to get into the franchise, I believe that sometime in your life you need to return to the original, to go all the way back where it started, where Tomino, Okawara, Yasuhiko, and the rest of the team developed a series like no other. A series that changed the anime and merchandise industry forever, way before Evangelion and Attack on Titan did it. So my friends, I'm Absa, and it's time to talk about Gundam. And not any Gundam, the OG Gundam from way back in the late 70s. Gundam. Let's go almost half a century back in time. In 1979, Mobile Suit Gundam, the first Gundam series, saw the light, and there we saw the birth of one of the most well-known anime rivalries of all the time, the fight between Amuro and Char Aznable. It's in this series where we get to know Universal Century, the longest and most abundant timeline of the franchise. And this is important because if you think of Gundam in a very simplistic way, the entire franchise can be divided in two branches. Series that belong to Universal Century and all of the others. And you may be asking, how is that so? Well, it is very rare that alternate timeline series of Gundam have something to do with each other, except for direct sequels like Seed and Seed Destiny. And yes, I know that Turn A Gundam and G-Reco have more or less something to do with Universal Century and with itself, but as I said, it's very rare. So yeah, if it's an alternate timeline, you can start watching the series from episode 1. But if it belongs to Universal Century, that may not be true, except for the original, or maybe the origin, and to a certain extent Thunderbolt. But yeah, the big picture is the next one, Universal Century and everything else. Back to our 79, and having in mind that the 70s was the era where super robots thrived, Mobile Suit Gundam rises as a new approach to the genre by having a more down-to-earth concept. Something not so magical and much more basic. Something that felt more believable and real. So, the real robot genre was invented. The plot of Gundam more or less goes about the fact that humanity has greatly polluted the Earth to the extent that the natural resources were not enough for us. So people had to move to space to live in colonies in order for our species to continue to live. But even after years of space migration, humanity is still plagued by inequality, injustices, and devastating wars. It's more or less in the 6th and 7th decade of Universal Century that a philosophical and political figure rises to try and get more rights, opportunity, and equality to spacenoids, the people living in space. This person belongs to Side 3 colony and his name is Zeon Zum Daikon. But Just when he was about to give a speech about the value of space noids and their possible evolution that came from living in space, he died. What follows next is that Dewin Savi, head of the Savi family and a close friend of Zeon, takes the power and control of the colony and declares themselves as a monarchy instead of an autonomous democratic republic. The Savis want to get rid of all terrestrial interference and are willing to do whatever it takes to get it. But obviously, the big leaders of Earth are not so fond of that idea, so they send the army of the EFSF, the Earth Federation Space Force. And it's more or less in this time where the 1-year war begins. One of the most violent and gruesome wars that humanity has ever seen, where thanks to the experiments and atrocities of the Principality of Zeon, millions of humans lost their life. And you may be asking, how is it possible that an ex-colony, now turned principality, could wage a war against the entire Earth sphere? Well, the true secret behind the power of Zeon was not only the incredible cruelty of the Savis, but also their developments in mobile suit. These human-like robots, called Sakus, are machines with the same precise movement capabilities that humans have. Just that they are like 10 or 12 times the size of a normal human, and they have excellent mobility in space. The development of those robots, or mobile suits, gave Zeon troops a lot of advantage in war and actually were about to turn the war in their favor. Yet, the Federation was able to complete Project V, an experimental weapon that would change forever modern warfare. All of this is explained much better in the OVAs called Mobile Suit Gundam The Origin, which serves kind of as a prequel for the original series. It's not really necessary for you to watch it before Gundam 79, and as a matter of fact, I really think that it's more rewarding if you watch it after. But the truth is that the OVAs end exactly before the first episode of the original series. As I was saying, Project V was an ultra-secret operation where the Federation developed and improved machines that could counter Zeon mobile suits. These weapons were the RX-75 gun tank, the RX-77 gun cannon, and the RX-78-2 Gundam, and a spaceship that was specifically designed to bring support to the mobile suits, the White Base. Here is where the original series starts, with Amuro Ray, son of Tem Ray, head of Project B, stumbling upon the Gundam and boarding the White Base with Bright Noah and the rest of the inexperienced crew on a journey that would change the outcome of the war. I have to say that the series hasn't aged that well, since it was a very experimental anime in its time and in fact didn't have a lot of budget. Also, female portrayals are very poorly done, yet its ideas and overall plot are very interesting and still manage to resonate to this day and age. The series comprises 43 episodes that were later adapted to a movie trilogy that, according to many people, it's way more bearable than the original anime. I really don't know, since I haven't watched the movies. So till now, I have talked about the world building behind the series, but what's Mobile Suit Gundam actually about? Let's find out. In essence, Gundam's story is about the conflict between the Earth Sphere and Zeon, led by Dewin Savi, but in reality, it's Giran Savi and his brothers and sister the ones who are in control. We also have the presence of veteran ace pilot Char Aznable, who leads Zeon attack troops but is really planning something else. On Earth's side, we have the Earth Federation, which is being represented by the inexperienced crew of the White Base and the Gundam's innocent and rookie pilot, Amuro Ray. As the series progresses, little by little, we get to know the soldiers behind Zeon's troops and the main cast of the White Base, and something that they both have in common is that both parties want to stop fighting, but the high commanders of Zeon and the Federation won't pay attention to them. They just want to win and prove their superiority. Back to this mysterious but charismatic ace pilot Char. Throughout the series, we learn that he is the eldest son of Zeon Zum Daikon, named Casval Rem Daikun, and the truth is that he's super angry with the Sabi family because he believes that they killed his father. His rage is such that he enlisted in Zeon's army with a fake name and wants to climb the ranks in order to finish them from the inside. As a side note, in case you weren't paying much attention, Gundam is a very political series with a lot of conflicting ideals. So, if you're looking for a more straightforward series, maybe this is not the way to go. Because you see, a great part of the series is, yes, Char fighting the Federation and the Gundam fighting the Zakus and the other Zeon mobile suits. But in reality, Char doesn't see the Gundam's pilot as a worthy opponent. Char's true goal is to bring down the entirety of the Sabi Zeon by means of internal strife. He doesn't care about the Federation or the Gundam. He just wants to destroy the Sabis. And much of the series is about Char plotting against the Sabis with a very tragic death of the only innocent Sabi. Amuro learning to pilot the Gundam and saving the white base while giving hope to the Federation that they could still win the war. It's almost till the end of the series where we are introduced to the Newtypes, particularly with the character Lala Sun. Newtypes are a new evolution of humanity that have developed communication skills beyond speech. You can more or less consider them psychics. That was exactly the evolution that Zeon Sum Daikon referred way back then, that humans would be able to communicate and understand each other beyond space and time without the need to talk. And that would make all of us much more empathic with one another, thus avoiding the endless wars that have plagued mankind's history. But, as everything in life, the first ones to test Newtype skills are the military scientists, and it's thanks to her evolved sense that Lala turns out to be a very effective pilot for Zeon. That, and also the fact that she has been mentored by Char. But the thing is, Char and Lala have developed a very close connection, even beyond that of a teacher and a student. Lala would become a very important figure throughout Char's life. Yet, in a conflict between Char and Amuro, she decides to defend Char and is killed by accident by Amuro. But the plot thickens, since a little time before this tragic event, be it by fate or by chance, Amuro met Lala, and since the boy is also a Newtype, they developed a very profound connection. What follows next is that after the death of Lala, Char now takes the destruction of the Gundam and its pilot to a personal level. Newtype characters will become essential in future Gundam series and events, and Newtypes with the soon-to-be-discovered Psycho Frame will give Gundam stories a supernatural flair that probably had its culmination in Unicorn and narrative. But it all started here, with Amuro, Char and Lala and their amplified triangle of emotional connections and feelings, all fueled because of their status as Newtypes with different levels of perception. But I'll return to Newtypes later. As we are approaching the end of the series, the conflict between Zeon and the Earth Sphere escalates very quickly and greatly, so the Federation sends the White Base as the spearhead against Aobaoku, the headquarters and space fortress of Zeon. Here takes place the biggest battle between Zeon and the Earth Federation, and is the cruelest battle with a lot of human and machine losses. Here is also where one of the most well-known fights between Amuro and Char takes place. On the one side, we have Char piloting the almost complete Zeon, and Amuro piloting its not-so-greatly upgraded Gundam. The Zeon was one of the most advanced mobile suits of its time, since it was the first one to use the Psychomo system, one of the first ones. The Psychomo system is a new kind of electronic system that was able to harness the power of psychic communication, hence the name Psychomo. This new system gave a lot of battle advantage to the Newtypes, and since Char was piloting the Zeon and Char is a Newtype, he was able to defeat a lot of enemies. But then Amuro came with his Gundam and they engaged in a very chaotic battle that slowly destroyed both of their mobile suits. Here is where that iconic image of the headless Gundam with the hand pointing to the top comes from. This is the last battle of the Gundam and the Zeon. But even without their mobile suits, Char and Amuro kept fighting. And here I have to make a disclaimer. I know that this series is 40 years old and I have spoiled certain important deaths, but what really changed the course of the war was, yes, in part the Gundam and Char, but also a very interesting event that happens with the chain of command of the Sabis. That I won't spoil, because I was really surprised when I saw that. And I knew that the Federation had to win. The thing is that I didn't expect that the internal struggle between the Sabis played that integral part in resolving the 1-year war. Anyway, the white base and the Gundam are both destroyed in the war, but Ku is defeated and taken, and fortunately almost all of the crew of the spaceship comes out alive, and with the space fortress now rendered powerless, Zeon finally ends the 1-year war, the most violent and gruesome war mankind has ever lived. And in the end, humanity realized that warfare completely changed with the advent of the mobile suits and the Newtypes. So Zeon Zoomed Icon correctly predicted the evolution of mankind. Yet, instead of using the newfound abilities for peace, Newtypes were being used as weaponized ace pilots to turn the war in their faction's favor. Certainly, some things are bound to never change. To be honest, Mobile Suit Gundam is a very slow-moving series. Very slow-moving series. In fact, when it first aired, it didn't reach the ratings needed to stay on the air, so what was first conceived as a 50-episode series ended up lasting only 43 episodes. You can really tell that in those early episodes, director Yoshiyuki Tomino and his crew didn't really have in mind what they were trying to accomplish with the anime. It kind of feels like a watered-down super robot show. It's more or less towards the latter half of the series where things start to get clear and you can finally see the payoffs of the political plots and all of the conspiracies. It must have been weird living in that period of time because Gundam was not that successful. In fact, the only thing that kept Gundam going were the model kits. So with that mini burst of success, Sunrise Studio decided to compile all of the Gundam story in a trilogy of movies. And with that new opportunity, Yoshiyuki Tomino restructured the series to remove all of the nonsense and leave only the important parts. And with those changes, the movie trilogy was a complete success. And with that success, more model kits were sold. They even renamed the model kits as Gunpla, an abbreviation of Gundam Plastic Mod. And with the combined success of the movie trilogy and Gunpla, 6 years later, Tomino would return to Universal Century to continue telling the saga of the Newtypes and the Gundams with a direct sequel of the original series called Zeta Gundam. Very broadly speaking, that is a story that originated the enormous franchise that is now Gundam, a cultural icon that has been alive for more than 4 decades with countless contributions to anime, figures, and even pop culture. Surprisingly, even though it's a series that is almost half a century old, its themes are still very relevant to today's world panorama. With pollution and global warming reaching alarming levels these past years and politicians not caring about those problems, Earth becoming uninhabitable is a future that we may reach. Also, war is something that continues to be present in our world, and the origin of those conflicts almost always can be rooted to the ambition and lack of empathy of the national leaders. Throughout the saga of Universal Century, we explore moral and ethical conflicts between different factions and sub-factions of the Earth Federation and the Zeon Space Knights. And even though all of those conflicts are solved by fictional means, we can get a glimpse of what it would be like if the world is submerged in a race where leaders are only driven by absolute ambition and absolute corruption. And back to the Newtypes, a very interesting parallel can be drawn between Newtypes and social media. I know, it sounds crazy, but allow me to explain. The theory behind Newtypes is that in order to adapt to life in space, the human body evolved with heightened mental awareness. You can almost say that they developed a sixth sense that allows them to empathically detect other Newtypes, and as a byproduct of their enhanced senses, they are sensitive to every intention directed at them by others. And as you know, there are good intentions and there are bad intentions. That's why they are the perfect pilots. Newtypes could react even before the opponent took actions, since enemies first harbored a hostile intention and then took action. Back to my theory of social media and Newtypes, you can say that throughout the events in the Universal Century, Newtypes, even though they are the human embodiment of limitless communication and total empathy, and according to Zeon Sum Daikon, they are the answer to all of our conflicts, Newtypes were unfortunately feared because of their powers and became experimental and disposable human weapons for greedy politicians and violent military leaders, creating even more war and destruction. Parallel to the Newtypes, in our world we have social media, which in theory can be seen as the digital embodiment of limitless communication with the power to uplift each and every human with a little piece of text or image. Yet, what ended up happening was the opposite. Social media became a medium to show off your material wealth, or even worse, a means to spread misinformation and hate. So, you can even say that social media now is the experimental form of communication where greedy politicians and violent world leaders encourage war and destruction. And don't get me wrong, I'm not here to tell you to stop using social media. Hell, this video is posted precisely in a social media network. But, as with the Newtypes, you can choose to spread messages of understanding, peace and empathy, like Amuro, or spread lies, deceit and manipulative ideas like Paptimus Triroko, the main antagonist of Zeta Gundam, and one of the best portrayals of what happens when a charismatic but self-centered individual rises to power and happens to be a powerful Newtype. The story of Zeta Gundam goes much more in depth in the exploration of Newtypes, the newly developed cyber Newtypes who are man-made artificial Newtypes, and the ethical and moral dilemmas of building a society after a great war. There, Tomino tried to explain that good guys are never completely good, nor bad guys are completely bad. But we'll explore Zeta in the next video. So here it is, my exploration in why the OG Gundam series, an anime that is almost half a century old, is still relevant to today's modern world affairs and why it still matters. Gundam's story is one that starts off slow, but once it grabs you, it never lets you go. It's a series with different layers of subtext that can be understood in various ways. Yoshiyuki Tomino made a great effort to make Gundam relevant in the 70s, and it has stood up to the test of time. Which is not exactly a good thing to say for social, political and international affairs, but I digress. This is the first entry of Universal Century, and the one that laid the groundwork for future series. And yes, even though Unicorn and Narrative feel all the way off, their core values, their core themes can be found here. Almost. So you definitely should give Gundam a try. And as you may or may not know, my name is Absa, and you can continue the conversation over at Twitter, where you can follow me at Absalonicas, and on Instagram, where I post pictures of my figures, my cats, and sometimes even myself. I'll be trying to talk more about anime, comics, maybe in figure, and definitely expect the Zeta Gundam video soon. Even so, let me know in the comments what other topics would you like me to hear about. And till next time, I'm Absa, and always remember that in fiction lies power. So let's use it to forge our own hero story.